Hey everybody, Yankee here. No one knows why Glock does some of the things they do. But today, I want to make a video here to talk about why one of the things they do is the right thing and why they do it. In a live chat the other night, someone asked me, why doesn't Glock go to all metal magazines? That way they could have a little bit more room inside the magazine and they could get more rounds in it. We were specifically talking about the Glock 43X and the Glock 48. Both of these guns use a single stack 10 round 9mm magazine. And someone said if they went to the metal magazines, the walls would be a little thinner, and therefore you'd have more room inside, and they could do a 15-round magazine. And they believe this to be true because a company named Shield Arms does a 15-round staggered stack magazine for this gun. Now, keep in mind, I am saying staggered stacked and not double stack, because even though double stack is staggered, there's a little bit of a difference here. Now, the reason why this idea is flawed is because there's a reason why Glock wouldn't do this. They would not make this same magazine that Shield Arms made, and that is reliability. Glock's number one thing is reliability. And if you go to this staggered stacked magazine like this, you're not having a very reliable magazine. It's not going to be as reliable as Glock wants. Now, keep in mind for this video, I'm going to use Glock's idea of what a magazine needs to be as saying it's 100% reliable. That's not going to be mathematically true. It'll be mostly reliable, 99.5 maybe, but we're going to use that as the benchmark and say that's 100% reliable. So those 10 round Glock magazines that Glock makes for those two guns are in their mind 100% reliable. Now I know that they are a little offset. They're a little different. These guns are a little bit weird in their thickness and size, etc. So they're actually using an offset magazine, but for illustration purposes here, I'm just going to use a regular 10 round magazine to try to tell people why that 15-round staggered magazine from Shield Arms is not reliable enough for Glock. Also, keep in mind that these illustrations of magazines aren't perfect. They're not measured to the millimeter or anything. These are just to give you a basic idea of the premise here. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, first off, let's say it is true that you could not do that 15 stack like Shield does in the Glock mag because it is slightly thicker. The walls are like 0.5 millimeter thicker. You couldn't do the same staggered pattern at the same, rate, etc. in there. It just wouldn't fit. It would be just like a millimeter shy of fitting in there. So you couldn't do it. Now, of course, if you went to a metal mag, you could do it, but Glock still wouldn't. Because let's look at it this way. Let's say that single stack 10 millimeter, that's what Glock considers to be 100% reliable. But when you go to that 15-round magazine, even though it's metal and has more room for rounds inside of it, if you set it up in that staggered configuration like that, it's not anywhere near as reliable as a single stack or even a double stack magazine. And to figure out why that is, you just have to look at the math of it. When you design a magazine, the spring, the follower, they have to do 1, 2, 3 things basically. They have to overcome the weight of the rounds and push them up. They have to overcome any resistance the rounds face while being pushed up. And they have to push them up at the right angle for the gun. The gun has been tuned for the rounds to be forced up at a specific angle. And whenever you design a magazine, you have to keep those things and other things in mind. You have to have the spring be the right weight, the right length, etc., that it can overcome all those things and push the round up fast enough, but not too hard. Just all kinds of things you have to do the math on. And when you look at how that single stack 10 round magazine works, it's a very simple equation because, the rounds are going in a straight line, straight up, feeding straight out. So it's pretty easy. The rounds are hitting top to bottom to top to bottom to top to bottom, all the way up, just pushing straight up in a line, feeding straight into the gun. Pretty simple formula there to get that right. Now, when you look at that staggered stacked magazine, those rounds are actually hitting each other at an angle and forcing themselves up at an angle. And that's creating resistance. Not only now do you have 50% more weight because you have 50% more rounds, you've also got more resistance added in here because those rounds are pushing outwards against the size of the magazine. That makes the math a lot harder. And it's not just that's resisting. Also, if you look at these rounds, since they're in two stacks that aren't actually touching top to bottom, they're wanting to come together and push the other round out of the way. So it's pushing the other rounds straight out. There's all kinds of ways this magazine is creating more friction, more resistance. That makes the math much harder on this magazine. And not only that, but if you look at the top here, the 10-round magazine, which is what the Glock 43X and Glock 48 are meant for, is feeding straight up. In the 15-round magazine, it's feeding at a slight angle. Someone else did a good video on this, and I will try to put a link to that in my comment section. But they did a video talking about this. Like I said, I will try to link it. But since the gun is not tuned for that round to be coming in at a slight angle like that, it's tuned for more of a straight up and down feed, not reliable. And therefore, if Glock went to that 15-round magazine in metal, instead of having what they would consider to be a 100% reliable magazine, they'd have one that's like, 92. And that's good enough for companies like Shield Arms, who are just making magazines. And if a magazine fails, they have to replace one. A magazine that they charge umpteen dollars for, $30, $40 for, that cost them probably $5 to make, they can replace it a couple of times and still make a profit. And most people are never going to get it replaced anyway if it just has a problem every great once in a while. So they can be okay with it being 92% reliable. Glock doesn't have that luxury since they're making the whole gun. If people start having feeding problems with the gun, they're going to blame the whole gun. It's going to hurt Glock's reputation and it's going to cost them money. So they don't want that to happen. They want to be 100% reliable. Reliability is Glock's game. Now you might be saying, well, even if they didn't go to a metal magazine, they could probably still put more rounds in this magazine, right? By using that staggered format if they made it for that gun. Well, they could overcome some of the problems, like the feeding angle. They could tune the gun for the feeding angle. But even if they went to either the same size mag they have now, with, say, 13 rounds in it, or a 15-round magazine that's slightly wider, they would still have the same problems. You'd have to be overcoming the resistance that all those rounds are creating as they're forcing out against the magazine walls, plus the extra weight of all those rounds, and you're just not going to get a formula that works right for Glock. You're going to get a magazine that's maybe 95% reliable, since it was designed for the gun and they took everything into account, but 95 is not good enough for Glock. They just don't want that. They want as close to 100% as they can get. And the closest they could get this is if they did it a double stack, which a double stack is almost as reliable as a single stack. Let's say it's 98%. Well, to get a lot of extra capacity, Glock is willing to do a double stack and sacrifice a couple points in reliability because you're getting a lot more rounds. You're getting like 17 rounds, 19 rounds, whatever, at least 15 rounds. So to them, that would be worth it. If you did a double stack with that many rounds, a 95% reliable mag wouldn't be good enough in the other sizes, but a 98% double stack is, because you're getting enough rounds to compensate for that slight reduction in reliability. But even with that reduction, it's still within the window of what Glock deems acceptable. But that's kind of a moot point anyway, a double stack magazine, because if you're looking at these guns, either the metal one or the polymer original Glock magazine, when you're talking about these specific magazines, neither of them can be double stacked. They're just not wide enough. So you'd have to be redesigning from the bottom up, and that's just making a double stack gun. So that would be a moot point, like I said. So you're going to have to use that staggered system in these magazines if you want to add more rounds. And this is where some people out there go to say, well, you're just saying staggered stack magazines don't work. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that they do work. In fact, I said, depending on how many rounds you put in there and what configuration you're using, they're anywhere between 92 and 95% reliable. What I'm saying is they're not as reliable as double stack, true double stacks, and double stacks aren't quite as reliable as true single stacks. That's just the reality of it. There are guns that are designed to use staggered magazines. They're designed so that that feed angle is proper, and they're designed in a way that the math is proper so that the rounds feed properly. The spring overcomes all that extra resistance. But if you'll notice, they're usually like 10-round magazines, and they're usually a little bit shorter because that's the sweet spot. They can get it to where they can put 10 rounds in a shorter magazine, have the right, math there so that it feeds properly into a proper gun and be reliable, probably as reliable as a double stack. If they do it well enough, they might be able to get it up to 98%. And now you'll say, well, if they can get a staggered stack magazine up to 98%, why don't they do that in the Glock 43X or the 48? Well, because since it is still staggered, even if they used a metal magazine or the polymer magazine, it's still staggered, which means they're going to be limited to how many rounds they can put in it and still have it be that 98% reliable, which would be pretty much acceptable if it was enough rounds extra. But it's only going to end up being like one extra round because they're only going to be able to get like 11 rounds in it to be reliable at that level. And giving up any reliability isn't worth it for one round. It might be worth it for 5, 7, 10, etc., but not one round. I would not give up 1% of reliability, much less 2, for one extra round. And Glock apparently agrees, because that's what they're doing here. They're saying we could probably get one more round in it and it still be reliable, but not 100% reliable. So why do it? If we were going to get 15 to 17, maybe even 19 rounds in it, it might be worth sacrificing that 2% of reliability, but not just for one round. So I think we can all agree here that in this case, Glock is doing the right thing. Oh, and before I leave here, I want to invite anyone who disagrees with anything I've said during this video to come into the live chat tonight. We do a live chat every night, 6 p.m. Pacific time, except for Monday and Wednesday when it's at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Come on in and let me know how you think I'm wrong. Just come on in, state your opinion. Believe me, everybody will appreciate that you do it. They'll think more of you than they do of you if you just whine and bitch in the comment section. So save your time. Don't post long posts in the comment section disagreeing with me. Come to the live chat. Come on into the chat. Let me know face to face, man to man, that you disagree with me and we'll discuss it. But with that being said, I want to go on here and say that right there, what we talked about just now, that's basically why the whole notion that if Glock just went to metal magazines, they could have more rounds in every guns, just isn't practical and just isn't true if they want their guns to be as reliable as possible.